I'd written for his first.
The presidential transition from Obama to Trump was a little rockier than most transitions. Remember, they had thrown out the guy who had been in charge of planning the transition, Chris Christie. That included throwing out all the briefing materials he had prepared, the lists of possible candidates for administration jobs. Even national security staffers have said that crucial briefing materials, even on national security issues, appear to have just never even been opened, let alone used substantively by the incoming Trump teams. Well, at the Health and Human Services Department, one of the people who was brought in as an advisor to the Trump transition was a longtime anti-abortion activist lawyer named Scott Lloyd. During that transition, Scott Lloyd was brought in as a special advisor in Health and Human Services, but he didn't have any specific job title. One day, though, somebody came to him and said, "Hey, Scott, we're going to pick you to be the head of the, what's it called again? Office of Refugee Resettlement. That's going to be your new job." Scott Lloyd had not applied for that job. Somebody from the White House just approached him and asked him if he wanted to do it. And he said, "Okay, sure, yeah, what's it called again?" There is nothing about Scott Lloyd that screams, "Put me in charge of the Office of Refugee Resettlement." He has never in his life worked on anything having to do with refugees or with resettling anyone or anything. But why not? Alongside the very controversial immigration policies and the behavior of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, during the Trump administration, there's also the specific matter of what happens to people who are underage when they come to this country. Kids who come to this country alone, who cross the border without parents. They actually don't get handled by ICE. They don't get put in detention centers the way people who get picked up by ICE do. They get funneled into a completely different government agency, into Health and Human Services, specifically to an office inside HHS that's charged with putting those kids in shelters that have social workers and people who can help the kids get medical care and who can help these kids who are here without their parents find a sponsor, an adult sponsor who could help them stay in this country potentially as a refugee. There's a specific office in HHS that does this work with those kids, and it is the Office of Refugee Resettlement, now headed somewhat randomly by Scott Lloyd, the anti-abortion activist who had never resettled refugees in his life. Where Scott Lloyd's resume really pops is just in anti-abortion activism. That's what he's been his whole life. He's written extensively on the subject. If you want to know where he falls on the number line of activism on that issue, you should see his essay about how birth control is just as bad as abortion. Actually, how birth control is abortion. He says you can't even call yourself anti-abortion if you think that contraception is okay. So Scott Lloyd, this very conservative anti-abortion activist, he takes over as the head of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And then headlines like this follow. Trump official sought to block abortion for 17-year-old rape victim. That 17-year-old rape victim was ultimately able to get an abortion, but only because the ACLU helped her sue Scott Lloyd. She's one of 4 anonymous teenagers who say they've been blocked from access to abortion and have taken Scott Lloyd to court in order to get it. Well, tonight we have some new insight into the kinds of tactics Scott Lloyd has been using against pregnant teenagers who have somewhat randomly ended up under his control because the Trump administration gave him this job. The ACLU has been suing on behalf of these teenagers. They deposed Scott Lloyd in December, and they have just now released selections of the transcript and the video of that deposition. The lead ACLU attorney on this case is Bridget Amiri, and she's asking the questions here. Watch.
You're personally opposed to abortion.
Information that we're within the military for a replacement?
Well, a number of names, Barbara Starr and I and colleagues are told about possible, at least on the list as possible replacements, among them Safra Catz. She's a CEO now of Oracle, but was also a member of the Trump transition team. John Bolton, a very conservative former U.S. ambassador to the UN. Another name mentioned is Stephen Biegun. He's now a vice president at Ford Motor Company, although he was also a former staff member, there's the name again, to Condoleezza Rice under George W. Bush, although we're getting pushback on that name both from Ford and from others. I should add that the NSA spokesperson, Michael Anton, he's calling all these reports of McMaster's departure by a favorite phrase of the White House, and that is fake news. The Defense Department, they're referring questions back to the White House because they're calling this a personnel matter. But I should also add that we're told that a senior military officer has been approached informally about taking that role from McMaster, although he turned it down because it was his belief that he could not fill that political job while serving in uniform, which is, of course, the conditions under which General McMaster did. He is still a member of the military, though he was out of uniform for that job. I'll just add one final caveat, always smart when you're looking at personnel decisions in the White House, that the ultimate decision on this is, of course, the president, and things, circumstances, all these position changes could change in the end.
Jim Maddow, appreciate that. Again, this is just the latest in a string of breaking news, whether it's Hope Hicks's departure, the Rob Porter scandal, the president going after his attorney general yet again. There's also this CNN exclusive reporting on first daughter Ivanka Trump. Two sources telling us that counterintelligence officials have been scrutinizing negotiations and financing surrounding Trump International Hotel and Tower in Vancouver. This apparently is part of the background check for a full security clearance. We should point out it's neither clear why the interest in this particular deal, nor is there any allegation of wrongdoing. On top of that, there's the New York Times reporting on Jared Kushner, his White House meetings with two big investment firms and their subsequent loans to the Kushner family company, loans to the tune of $500 million. So a lot happening with the White House. Put it all together, makes quite a picture. It's certainly something to talk about with Axe Files host David Axelrod, who worked for a president whose nickname was No Drama. This news about General McMaster leaving, I mean, if and when he does, he'll be the 11th top-level staffer to leave. What does that say about this White House?
There's never been a parallel to this in previous White Houses. You want an experienced team, you want a team that works well with the president and each other, and you want them in place over a long period of time so you can have consistent policy and implement it effectively. If you're running people in and out like, an NBA basketball game, it's not gonna work.
I mean, everybody I've ever talked to who works in the White House talks about how difficult it can be, even in the best of circumstances. But you look at what's gone on just this week alone. Is this sustainable?
Yeah, well, Anderson, people who were close to the president said when he took office, look, he's comfortable with chaos. That's how he's always operated. It doesn't bother him. But it's one thing to run the Trump organization, which is essentially a branding vehicle for him, a small business compared to certainly the United States government. He's now sitting in the most powerful office on the planet, and everything he does is consequential. And so for all of this chaos to reign around him, for this flouting of rules, the potential trade war that he apparently launched rather casually today over the advice of many of his senior national security and economic advisors. Those kinds of things are deeply concerning, and they have consequences that people will feel in their lives. And so I don't know if it could certainly go on like this, but it can't go on like this without catastrophic impacts on the country. And that's what people should be concerned about.
Well, and also, I mean, obviously, there's the muscle flex we saw from Russia today, Putin claiming to have this nuclear-capable cruise missile with unlimited range that's capable of eluding air defense system. The U.S. is doubting the veracity of it, but it's another provocation from Russia with another muted response from the White House.
Exactly. And then you have North Korea, Anderson, and now these growing reports that there is real planning going on for military action in North Korea. That war would be catastrophic, as Secretary Mattis has said, and there would be hundreds and hundreds of thousands, perhaps more, lives lost of our allies, of our troops. You don't want that decision being made in a chaotic environment or in a casual way.
The situation now with Ivanka Trump, counterintelligence officials scrutinizing this business deal, I mean, it just seems like yet another example of how complicated and problematic the lines between the Trump White House and the Trump family business continue to be.
Donald Trump has basically lived his life flouting rules, norms, institutions, sometimes skirting laws, and has made that a business practice. And so, he has been opaque about his own financial dealings, and so that flows down to everyone else. And obviously, this one is very close to him because it's his daughter and his son-in-law. But it's really unthinkable to me, and it would be to anybody else who served in the White House before this administration, that you could go into the White House and have these kinds of entanglements and flout them by having meetings with people who are doing business with your businesses and so on. It's really quite something.
Well, also, I mean, Donald Trump ran attacking Hillary Clinton for mishandling classified information. He said she would be the only president who wouldn't be qualified to actually get a security clearance. The irony being that he seems to be surrounded by people who are unable to get, a full security clearance. They only have temporary ones. The fact that this business thing is holding up Ivanka Trump's security clearance. We obviously know about Jared Kushner's clearance being downgraded earlier in the week. How can any of these people perform their job as senior advisors to the president if they don't have this kind of clearance?
Well, they can't, certainly not with the portfolio that Jared Kushner has. You can't be in the midst of the Middle East peace process or dealing with Mexico and the freighted relations we have with Mexico right now and a number of the other issues that he's dealing with without top secret security clearance. And I think that's why there seems to be this tension between General Kelly and Jared Kushner over this issue. They can say that he can do his job without these, but he really can't. The other question is he really being walled off from this information, right, or is it being shared with him by the president himself? In any case, you have people who are, and they can. They absolutely can. If you don't respect rules, you can do anything if you're president of the United States, as he has pretty much said, including this. But it compromises national security, and that's the reason why he's not getting his security clearance.
The story you referenced earlier from the New York Times reporting about Jared Kushner's family real estate group obtaining business loans after Kushner met with the company heads of Apollo Group Management, Citigroup, in his official government capacity. I mean, Kushner's attorneys have said, look, there's nothing to see there, nothing there. Just the appearance of these meetings and then having loans just seems like something that could have been avoided.
Well, there's no question about it, unless you didn't want to avoid it. It could be that this wasn't just an oversight, but right, there was an intent to have these meetings. Look, when I was in the White House, the Obama administration promulgated rules that said that, we would say who came into the White House and who they were meeting with. Those rules have been rolled back by the Trump administration. The Trump administration doesn't really believe the American people should have visibility into the business dealings of the president or anybody around him. And so we can't wholly judge these conflicts of interest. Prosecutors, however, have more visibility into it, and therein lies the rub for them, potentially.
David Axelrod. Thanks, David. Well, let's bring in the panel. Jeffrey Toobin, Rich Lowry, Margaret Hoover, Bakari Sellers, and Asha Rangappa. Asha, you specialized, I think, in national security when you were at the FBI. What do you make of a departure like this? How significant is it in the national security apparatus?
Well, the role of the National Security Council is to coordinate national security policy. It's to get the expertise of all the different agencies, recommend policy to the president to act on it. Now, remember that when he first came into office, President Trump put Steve Bannon on the Principals Committee of the National Security Council, and McMaster took him off. Then we have Kushner having these meetings, bypassing the National Security Council and not reporting them. And we have this parade of intel chiefs who have now testified that they've received no direction from the president on taking a policy response to Russia. So I think what you have here is a president who really doesn't take this council's role very seriously or kind of pay attention to that expertise. So I can imagine that it has been frustrating from McMaster's side to deal with that situation.
Margaret, you were saying H.R. McMaster was at Hoover just...
Yeah, he did visit the Hoover Institution's Winter Board of Overseers meeting and had some conversations, of course, with senior leadership there. He had been at the Hoover Institution as a military fellow before many military fellows actually spent time at the Hoover Institution. James Mattis was, of course, in retirement at the Hoover Institution when he was pulled out of retirement to go be the defense secretary. He wrote his book, Dear Election of Duty, H.R. McMaster did while he was at the Hoover Institution. It would be a very natural place for him to return. But look, one of the things that you hear from people sort of that are in the national security apparatus is that H.R. McMaster, because of his military background, has never been afraid to tell the president what he needs to know in those meetings, and because of that, he takes on arrows, he takes on bullets, he takes on incoming, because it's hard to tell the president what he needs to know sometimes, because this president sometimes doesn't want to hear certain things. So there is a sense that you can only take on so much water, I think, with this president and in this White House, and it seems that McMaster's gotten to the end of his rope.
Rich, how do you see it? I mean, if when H.R. McMaster got the job, a lot of people sort of breathed a sigh of relief. Does it worry you that a person like him would be leaving this White House at this time?
Well, first of all, I don't know how real the story is. A lot of the reporting seems very specific, but then there are also people very close to the situation who don't think this is happening. Right. We had a similar episode 2 months ago where there was very specific reporting about Tillerson being at the end of his tether, and he's still there. Right. So who knows? I know H.R. McMaster a little bit. I went on a trip with him to Iraq and Afghanistan in the 07-08 time frame. He's one of the finest people I've ever met. He's a brilliant guy. He's physically brave, but nothing quite prepares you for this kind of position in this sort of administration. And we've seen a lot of reporting that he's much too buttoned up and serious for Trump, who likes a more meandering style, and he's never really made a connection with him. But I think with every day that passes, and you have more of these kind of stories, whether it's McMaster or Jeff Sessions or Tillerson or whoever else, it's harder to attract good talent into this administration. So I think they're looking potentially at a slow-rolling, low-level personnel crisis, and they should basically want to keep everyone who's there, because it'd be very hard to replace any of them.
Margaret?
Which is ironically why you have the people who are saying yes tend to be military service members, because there is a sense of duty to service, to the presidency, to the country, where it's much easier to get somebody from the military in the past than there is to get from the private sector, because people don't want to besmirch their reputations. They feel like they have more to lose.
But I mean, when you look at all the departures, though, from this White House, I mean, it's normal after a year for there to be turnover. I mean, it is a, Jeff, I mean, it's a large...
It's beyond the, well beyond the normal in terms of turnover. You know, I think most people, and I would certainly include myself in this, you know, we don't really care too much about sort of how the sausage is made, as long as the results are the results are good. And you know, this administration has actually been very fortunate that in 13, 14 months there has not been a major national security crisis. You know, that Korea has stayed at a low boil. But you know, every administration gets tested, whether it's here or when it's going to be in Iran, and then it's really going to matter that there are people there who know what the hell they're doing. And I think, you know, whatever you think of McMaster, you know, in terms of the substance of the administration, everybody acknowledges that he is a thoroughgoing professional. And if he's gone and, you know, it's just Steve Miller, you know, who knows nothing about national security, who seems to be the only policy person who survived to this period, you know, then that's a very scary scenario.
I think the reason you have a lot of military men and women who join this administration is because they know and understand that, one, it's about service of your country, but two, very practically, they will have a job or an opportunity when they leave this White House. This White House is damaged. This White House is not a place where any up-and-coming superstar who is an expert in his or her field wants to go work, because the problem is when you leave this White House, you will carry with you the stain of this White House. So people don't want to endure that. And you know, as a Democrat, just as an American, I can tell you that there are a couple of people we're thankful for in this White House. And there was a point in time when I had General Kelly on this list, but he's kind of become wayward. But General McMaster is someone that, as a Democrat, you're honestly thankful that he's there, because he upholds some of the fundamental tenets of our democracy. The other is General Mattis. You know, you're thankful you have somebody with that experience who appears to be certainly level-headed. And these are the only two people, along with Nikki Haley, who haven't taken on the personality of their boss. And everyone else has been tainted by Donald Trump, and then you look in the mirror and you become Donald Trump.
We got to take a quick break. When we continue, more about a White House that seems to be, well, in turmoil almost daily, and we'll examine the curious, unprecedented, and possibly fractured relationship between President Trump and his own Attorney General. Tonight, yet another big departure apparently coming at the White House. Before the break, you heard David Axelrod said this would have a catastrophic impact on the country if it continues. The chaos he's talking about. We're barely past the one-year mark for this administration. Already, as we showed you, the senior staff looks much different than it was at the beginning. Again, these are just a few of the top people who have gone since left the West Wing. Luckily, the panel is still all here, at least for this break. I mean,
we've just been fired.
Margaret, I mean, as a White House, how unusual is this just in terms of sheer volume and the sort of, I mean, does it seem chaotic to you?
Well, we've all acknowledged that it's incredibly chaotic because the turnover is so fast. But what that does to, I mean, it takes a while for any administration to get rolling, sort of to get their sea legs, to begin to understand and work functionally with the other apparatuses in the executive branch, with the Congress. And that's even if you have, you know, consistency throughout the first 365 days of any White House. So it makes it incredibly difficult for a White House that wants to be effective or pursue any policy agenda or really get anything done if there's this much turnover. You're building relationships. It just makes it incredibly discordant.
Do you think, Rich, I mean, as a conservative, how concerned are you about the ethics of having, you know, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, you know, still in some capacity involved with their businesses, meeting with, you know, I mean, there's this latest reporting, I guess, from the New York Times about this meeting with Jared Kushner.
I don't think they ever should have been there in the first place. I understand why they want to be there.
You don't think they should be there because?
Well, one, they know nothing about government. Two, it's going to inherently make the policy making and the politics within the White House more complicated, because you don't know whether you can openly disagree, you know, with the son-in-law or with the daughter. And three, they're just compromised in terms of the business. So I understand why they want to be there. They want to protect their father or father-in-law, and certainly there are plenty of other presidents of relatives serving in administration, sometimes in quite high-level capacities. But I think this was a mistake from the beginning, and it's probably not going to end well, and we're already seeing signs of that.
See, there's a difference between just sort of normal White House chaos, which I don't think most people care about as long as the results are good. What makes the Ivanka and Jared particular problem so different is that he has divided loyalties. You know, he is negotiating with countries whose money he needs for his business. You know, Qatar, China, Mexico. His company, perhaps not him, is trying to get investment capital from people he is talking to in business. That's a conflict of interest. That's a security risk. That really does impact the way you know, the government could function. Whereas the other stuff about, you know, whether it's McMaster or someone else, I don't think we can really judge what difference it would
If
make.
you're Jared Kushner, it's even if you're not involved in the financing, trying to get financing for 666, your big building here, which has a huge loan coming due, you cannot eliminate that from your mind.
Of course, and neither can the people. I mean, these people are smart they're talking to. You know, China has sovereign funds. Qatar has sovereign funds. He's dealing with crises involving both of those countries. At the same time, his company, which he is still an investor in, though not, you know, in active management supposedly, is trying to desperately save their company, needing hundreds of millions of dollars. He's already getting hundreds of millions of dollars from other people he's negotiating.
But, you know, the argument Stephen Moore made in the last hour is that, look, the American people knew Donald Trump was a businessman. They liked that about him. And, you know, are you saying that business people should not have jobs in the White House?
The problem is that when they can also be targeted by foreign countries, by intelligence services. We just found out that Ivanka's business might be being investigated by counterintelligence agents at the FBI. Now, it's not a criminal investigation. It doesn't mean that she's done anything wrong. But what this means is that foreign intelligence services likely, if the FBI is investigating it, either there's been contact or some kind of targeting because they have identified a vulnerability that they can exploit. And they're not going to waste their time unless they see that. And she has access. And I think, as Rich mentioned, why are they here? It's not like they have an expertise that can't be replaced anywhere else.
Can I just review Steve Moore's argument? Steve Moore's argument is completely erroneous. The idea that the American people hired him because he's a businessman is fine. They hired him then, under that premise, because of the talents he brings to the job, but not so that he can have his business and the job of the presidency at the same time. When you're the president, you have one job. It is taking care of the American people. It is securing the homeland. It is not also enriching yourself. And I think what ends up happening is when there are not clear laws or regulations in place, as there aren't in this case, there are no anti-nepotism laws at the executive level. We need to rely on the legislative branch to fix this on the back end.
Can I just bring up one thing? I mean, we've been talking about the ethics of Kushner and the ethics of Ivanka, and, you know, we talk about this White House, but I think for most of the American people, what they're seeing is not an ethical dilemma. I mean, I think people set that aside for Donald Trump when they elected him. There was no way that Donald Trump ran on morals, values, and ethics. But what we're starting to see is a lack of competence in the White House. I mean, it's just very fundamentally a lack of competence. I mean, look at the people he's hiring. I mean, you have Mooch as communications director. What experience does he bring to the table? Omarosa. I mean, you fired her on The Apprentice, but you hire her in real life? I mean, where does that work? And you just go down the list of people. You know, Ivanka, Jared. I mean, you love your daughter to death. You love your son-in-law to death. But does that mean that they need to be top secret
another
clearance?
thing that's going on here.
Competence is the problem.
There's a shadow war. There's a shadow war between Jared and General Kelly. I think it's very important for the administration that Kelly win that war and not go anywhere.
We're going to take a quick break. Coming up, the latest word from the White House and whether Attorney General Sessions may be on his way out. At the top tonight, another day in the White House, another day of questions about whether the president has confidence in or even likes his own Attorney General. Here's what Sarah Sanders said when asked about it at today's briefing.
Does the president want to get rid of his Attorney General? Not that I know of.
Not that I know of. I'd imagine that is not the most comforting of statements if you're just Jeff Sessions or maybe his assistant back now with the panel. I mean, it is extraordinary. And again, I mean, Jeff Sessions, whether you like him or not, he's executing the president's agenda perhaps more efficiently than any other cabinet official that we know about.
It has to be so painful for Jeff Sessions. One, just the public humiliation of it. But two, the irony of it. The first senator to endorse Trump, someone who on Trump's signature issues was there before any other Republican, and he's actually implementing the agenda except for one thing, which the president doesn't consider him personally loyal enough. And the president hates him. He is derisive and insulting towards him, even more so in private. And if he could fire him, he would. And apparently his policy is try to humiliate him into quitting, which I don't think is going to happen. But if he fired him or he quit, it would be a crisis in the Justice Department. It'd be very hard to get another Senate-confirmed Attorney General. So I think he's there for the duration. Now, whether that's a reprieve or a punishment, I don't know.
And let's remember what exactly his complaint is about Jeff Sessions. His primary complaint is that he recused himself and led to the appointment of Mueller, which was obviously the right thing for Sessions to do under any definition of legal ethics. But if you look at the continuing complaints, it's why isn't the Justice Department prosecuting Hillary Clinton? Think about what that means about American democracy, that the President of the United States is calling for the criminal prosecution of his political adversaries. That's something that's never happened in this country. It is a completely outrageous thing. But even just this early in the administration, we're all sort of, well, you know, that's
honestly,
Trump.
it reminds me of like Equatorial Guinea.
Equatorial Guinea.
Yeah.
Turkey,
Right.
Russia. Right. I mean, you know, these authoritarian countries where the political enemies wind up in prison. These are the countries that Trump, you know, Guinea, that appear to be his models, and that is just so un-American. I mean, and the fact that it's just gone on for so long, and we just sort of normalize it is madness.
Equatorial Guinea, not Guinea.
Equatorial. Sorry.
If Jeff Sessions wasn't so anti-immigrant, anti-voting rights, anti-minority, anti-women's rights, I mean, if the list goes on and on and on, you could actually feel sorry for this man. But the fact is, you sign up for this. You know who you're working for. You know the horse or the person who brought you to the dance. So now you're looking at Donald Trump and you expect him to be something different? I mean, I don't have a lot of sympathy for Jeff Sessions now, to quote his former chief of staff, being the proverbial whipping boy that he is. I mean, the fact is, I don't know who in their right mind would want to go work for this administration at any level. And he gave up a great seat. He gave up a seat in the United States Senate to now be demoted to whipping boy for the Trump White House and all of Donald Trump's friends.
Well, I want to give him credit for actually making a strong statement in response to the president.
Which is really the first time we've heard him push back. It's the first time he's done that, and I really do think that the career men and women at the Department of Justice and the FBI really needed that statement to be made, and then he made a very symbolic gesture by having a very public dinner with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. And I do have to say, and what I tell people is whether you like Sessions or not, he is actually critical to keep there because it is him he serves as a buffer between the president and Mueller, because it is because of his refusal that Rod Rosenstein is in charge of the Mueller investigation. If Sessions left and was replaced, Mueller would then report to the new Attorney General and may not have the same latitude and discretion that he is exercising apparently under Rosenstein, who's also a Republican appointee. But to Richard's point, it would be difficult for another candidate to pass the confirmation.
But he could fill that position.
Yeah, I look, if Trump wants a crony, he's not going to get a crony through the Senate. The only person the Senate would confirm, I believe, would be an old kind of graybeard type with a lot of independent credibility. And is someone like that really going to sign up to serve Donald Trump? So I'm a fan of Jeff Sessions. I think it's ridiculous, the idea that he's anti-minority. But it's very painful to see. He is a dignified guy. He would never treat anyone the way the President of the United States is treating him.
That's a low bar. I mean, listen, let's not forget who Jeff Sessions is. I mean, Coretta Scott King told us who Jeff Sessions was when she wrote a letter to prevent him from being a federal judge. I mean, this is who Jeff Sessions is. So when I say that he's anti-immigrant or anti-Voting Rights Act, I mean, I'm not coming without any basis or fact. But even more importantly, I mean, I think that I have more faith in our systems of government than to believe that Jeff Sessions is, with all due respect, somehow indispensable. Jeff Sessions is not indispensable by any stretch. I mean, if he wants to stay, so be it. God bless him.
So who do you think the next Attorney General would be?
Man, I have no idea. I mean, for me to actually guess who Donald Trump would appoint to anything is beyond my capability or beyond my realm of fact. I mean, if I had to bet right now who he would appoint, Jared Kushner. I mean, we really don't know what Donald Trump...
And the Senate would confirm it.
Rudy Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani. I mean, we have no idea where that would come from. But my only point remains, Jeff Sessions signed up for this, so now Jeff Sessions is the whipping boy.
Thanks, everybody. Coming up next, breaking news on how the president's statements at yesterday's remarkable gun policy meeting upset plans to unveil new White House gun proposals today. That and the NRA's top spokesperson, her reaction to what the president said, some of which her group sharply opposes. There's breaking news in the wake of yesterday's gun policy conference at the White House. CNN is reporting that his remarks derailed some carefully laid out White House plans to roll out some different proposals. Here's a sample of what the president had to say.
Now, this is not a popular thing to say in terms of the NRA, but I'm saying it anyway. I'm going to just have to say it. But you can't buy, I mean, think of it. You can buy a handgun. You can't buy one. You have to wait till you're 21. But you can buy the kind of weapon used in the school shooting at 18. I think it's something you have to think about. I can say that the NRA is opposed to it. And I'm a fan of the NRA. I mean, there's no bigger fan. I'm a big fan of the NRA. They want to do it. These are great people. These are great patriots. They love our country. But that doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. It doesn't make sense that I have to wait till I'm 21 to get a handgun, but I can get this weapon at 18. I don't know. So I was just curious as to what you did in your bill.
We didn't address it, Mr. President. Look, I think
why? Because you're afraid of the NRA, right?
Dana Lash, the spokesperson for the National Rifle Association. You may remember she was in the center of some pretty fierce debate last week at the CNN Town Hall in Florida. I spoke to her earlier tonight. Dana, in that meeting yesterday, the president seemed to express support for raising the age for purchasing certain guns from 18 to 21, as well as the Manchin Toomey bill, even taking guns in certain circumstances without due process, which is obviously, due process is something we hear a lot from the NRA. Does the NRA feel betrayed by the president?
Well, there was a lot of stuff discussed during this meeting, and I don't think any of it really made for good policy to keep our kids safe. And with regards to increasing age restrictions, purchasing long guns, this is something that the NRA opposes because it doesn't.
That's a no-go.
It's a no-go. Yeah, there's no point in punishing millions of young adults for something that they didn't do. I mean, I want to be quite clear what it is we're discussing. We're talking about putting their liberty on the chopping block and holding them responsible for the incompetency of the government. It's the government's responsibility. We had 45 missed calls, 2 missed FBI tips. The murderer called the Broward Sheriff Department himself and said, I am a danger. The family members called, neighbors called. It's not these law-abiding Americans. They didn't get this call. So it's unfathomable to me to think that they're responsible and they should be paying the price for this. And not to mention, Anderson, too, I mean, we have to address all of these politicians who for decades have ignored this huge mental health crisis that we have in the United States that I hope that we can have a genuine discussion on because it's truly a problem.
If President Obama had said, you know what, I kind of believe in taking the guns first and then going through due process second, I would imagine the NRA would have spoken out incredibly strongly about that, as would many Republicans. Again, I guess just officially, does the NRA feel betrayed by this president? I mean, he's due process is something I hear you and the NRA talk about all the time, and understandably, this president just said, right, you know what, due process comes second. Take the guns. That's the fear of so many gun owners in the NRA.
Right. And it is. I mean, it's a concern, and we want to make sure that we're just not stripping constitutional rights from people without making sure that they have their day in court. I mean, that's one of the things that NRA leadership stressed to the president Sunday when they met with him for lunch, that, look, this is a cornerstone of America. We have to respect people's due process. And we can also do that while keeping everyone safe. Now, where it concerns, the previous president, former President Obama, they definitely did have a very different approach. And we know that former President Obama did not even come close to thinking as President Trump does on, for instance, national reciprocity or a number of other issues. I mean, he was pretty clear in that, but I think the response would have been the same.
So if the president continues down this road, continues to want to raise the age of 21, fights for that, fights for bump stocks, fights for eliminating bump stocks, fights for all the things he talked about in that meeting, even taking guns, worrying about due process later. What's the message from the NRA to him on that in terms of what's going to happen in the voting booth?
Well, we've made it clear where the NRA has made it clear where they stand in terms of where we are with increasing the age. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to punish people to do that. I mean, I lived on my own before I was 21 years old, and I can't imagine not, in my mind, Anderson, I'm like 9 feet tall and I weigh 500 pounds, but in reality, I'm 5'6" and I weigh $125. I will be easily overpowered, and I can't imagine living by myself and not having an ability to defend myself. And there are millions of young adults that age that are in that same predicament. It doesn't make any sense to punish them for the failures of government. But one thing that the president has talked about, and that I like hearing, and that a lot of members of the NRA, they like hearing as well, has to do with school safety and whether or not teachers want to be armed. And I know that there are a lot of media reports. They say, well, Trump is talking about mandatory arming of teachers, which he's not. And I think it's unfair to portray it that way.
I mean,
yeah, I have. I've read some of this. I read some of the stories on air. There were a couple of stories on air written that I shared.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's saying, look, it's teachers who want to do it, teachers who have a skill for it, who want to receive more training.
And if parents and schools determine if they determine that that's best for their school district, then they have the freedom and the sovereignty to make that choice for their district. And that's encouraging. This is something, the NRA School Shield program is something Wayne LaPierre's talked a lot about. He was really ridiculed when he first discussed it's really hardening schools. But now this is something everyone thankfully is talking about. We live in an era where it seems that evil can go unaccounted for. We got to protect our kids and teachers.
Let me just try this one more time, because I've asked you if you feel betrayed, if the NRA feels betrayed, if the president should be worried about the NRA. It does feel like you are, with respect, going out of your way to give the president a wide berth here and not go after him or not threaten him in any way, which I have to feel like if this was another president or a Democratic president saying these things, there would be some warning shots from the NRA or, some red flags raised from the NRA saying, look, do not go down this road.
I don't think that anybody, just speaking for me personally for a second, anyone who knows me for any length of time, and particularly during the primary, would ever accuse me of going easy on anybody. But the thing is I can't react, and I don't think NRA members can react to something that hasn't happened yet.
So you think it's just talk from him?
I mean, we did come out.
Maybe just talk.
It could be. I mean, I think he's just entertaining both sides. I think he's listening to see what both sides have to say.
He does tend to agree with the last person he has spoken to, if it's, Dianne Feinstein or Republican. But you don't believe that he really wants to raise the age to 21. Or you believe maybe he does, but other people will influence him not to do that. I mean, you're not manning the ramparts at this point because you don't think it's necessarily going to be something the White House is pushing for.
Yeah, because right now it seems that they're just in a discussion phase, and which is good. And I hope that they would be talking to everyone and really hearing what voters are thinking about this, and their representatives and senators are saying. I mean, that's what he's supposed to do. I mean, that's what his job is. And I was glad to see it on TV, but and just kind of getting ideas and seeing what he likes and what he doesn't like. But we'll react. I mean, the NRA's already made it clear in terms of increasing the age, and we'll wait and see what else comes out. Remember, there are more of these listening sessions, so this is just the first one. Let's see what else is said.
All right, Dana Loesch, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson.
All right, stay with us on a very busy night. A conversation with a Florida Republican congressman who was at the televised White House meeting, who now favors a ban on assault style, and the vice president joining us.